morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Business Acceleration Workshop. I'm really excited to be your host today. My name is Amanda, and Steve is also here with us to help us out with any of your questions throughout the webinar. In case you're not as familiar with Surefire and who we are, we're located in Northern Virginia, and our all-in-one platform allows local businesses to guide their digital marketing investments from a single dashboard, providing actionable insights so they can generate more business and stop wasting money. Our mission here is to educate businesses on a variety of topics to help you succeed and help the industry grow. We're really excited to have Mark G. Richardson as our advisor, and I'm really excited to have him joining us for this webinar today. A few quick reminders before we get started. You'll get the recording of this chat tomorrow, and if you have any questions or want to make comments, you can use the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. Because you're on the webinar with us right now, one attendee will have a chance to win a Google Home Hub that we'll be giving away at the end of the talk. Stay tuned after the presentation when we will be announcing the winner. So today we have Mark with us, leading authority in the home services industry and author of 3 books. You'll have a chance to request one of his best-selling books at the end of the webinar. He has a wonderful presentation for you all, so with that, I will pass it on over to Mark.
Great, thank you, Amanda, and I'm excited to again be with you, and certainly very focused on our topic today. I love actually the title, Business Acceleration, Take It to the Next Level. And you know, as I was thinking about this particular talk this morning, I was thinking, you know, many of you heard the adage, if a business is not growing, it's dying. And I think oftentimes I think there's some misunderstandings as it relates to that particular adage that hopefully we'll be clearing up today. So there really are 3 goals that I want to try to help you with today. One is I want you to gain insights about business. And thankfully, you know, I've got a fair amount of scars and bruises when it comes to, I think, the subject of growing a business, having taken a very small company and seen some pretty substantial growth. So we're going to gain some insights about it. So I think for those of you that, you know, are looking for that secret sauce or looking for that magic bullet, you know, you might, quite frankly, be a little bit disappointed because it's usually more about a collection of things. It's kind of more of like martial arts than it is necessarily than winning the lottery. So additionally, in terms of kind of insights, industry insights, as well as misconceptions, those kind of things, we're going to learn. We're going to learn on how to take a business to the next level. We're going to talk about different altitudes of business, what 1 million versus 3 million versus $5 million level businesses, you know, and if there's one common denominator that I find, especially those that have not experienced higher levels of growth, is that it's kind of like flying out a little bit in the dark, and you don't know what it's like if you're a $3 million business, what it's like to be at 7. So I'm going to try to give you some broad guidelines, but I would also encourage, whether it's with our friends here at Surefire or with myself or with the industry magazines, that you start to be more of a student of the subject of growth and learn more about what it might become. And the next thing, I think what I want to try to accomplish is that, you know, this is very much a journey. It's very much of a movie and not just a snapshot. And therefore, I think it's important that you start to establish a process of acceleration, a process to take your business to the next level. And I think if you just kind of let it influence you as opposed to you controlling it, it's a very different outcome. So let me start with some misconceptions. You know, why do I start with that? Because, you know, just like many, many years ago when we thought the world was flat, you know, it influenced how we, you know, would approach certain things. Well, I think when it comes to business, there are also some misconceptions. So I'm going to throw out a few I grabbed the other day that I think are important for you to think about. One is bigger is better. Now, better is better, not bigger is better. I know a lot of $1-2 million companies that, quite frankly, are better than $8 or $9 million companies. So bigger is not better, better is better, and I think that's important. good work equals growth or the ability to grow a business. Not necessarily. You know, in my book, How Fit Is Your Business, the actual focus on the product itself is only one of the elements of a fit business. So you need to think about necessarily all the other elements. It's sort of like if I get my cholesterol level down, I'm going to be healthy. Not necessarily. I also have a lot of other elements when it comes to your health that's important. The more I do, the more I make. Again, not necessarily true. There are a lot of folks that have smaller companies, quite frankly, that are more profitable than very, very big companies. And again, we oftentimes equate top line revenue with the amount of money that you make. I know many people that have a $2-3 million company that are well into the six-figure incomes, whereas I know $10 million companies that, you know, they're just barely getting there as well. So that is not necessarily true. Another misconception I hear all the time, and having written the book, The Art of Time Mastery, is I don't have time. If there is one kind of circumstance or cards that we're all dealt with, and that is we all are given 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But it's interesting how some are much more successful than others. You do have time. The question is, how do you choose to spend your time and what you're focused on as it relates to your business? Another misconception is personal referrals are good clients. Now, certainly your friends here at Surefire can give you some data on this, but that's not necessarily true. Personal referrals are easy sales, but not necessarily good clients. You know, I have neighbors, for example, that are very nice people that I would refer them, but that doesn't mean my neighbors are necessarily the same as me as it relates to clients. So what you need to do is have the discipline and have a sales process to really vet and filter out and really distinguish the difference between good clients and personal referrals. Doing a wide range of projects is better. Not necessarily. You know, one of the keys that I'll talk about in business is being focused, and a wide range of projects sometimes dilutes your focus. And I think the more that you stay laser focused, the more likely you're going to be successful. Technology will revolutionize the business. Now, this is a little bit of spin on the words, but the reality is it's not that it will, it already has. And if you're not focused on the technologies and what the technologies are today and the future, then you're going to fall short. Yes, of course, we still want high touch and high tech to be kind of in balance, but without high tech, you're absolutely going to become irrelevant. And I think that's what's critical. So what I want to do next is talk a little bit about the industry. If you're going to take your business to the next level, you've got to understand the game. You got to understand the environment. Imagine, for example, would you really enjoy football if you didn't know how many points you got with a touchdown? Would you really enjoy football if you didn't understand the difference between a linebacker and a wide receiver? Of course not. So you've got to have a better degree of knowledge if you want to grow your business and take it to the next level. So I pulled some slides from some of my work at Harvard University, as well as other things that I've experienced as I share, I think, what's going on. The first is the industry makeup itself. Now, you know, I think even large manufacturers are a little bit confused about the home improvement industry and the remodeling makeup. So this little slide that you're looking at here, I think helps you to kind of graphically see it. And what I'm going to walk you through, without huge amount of detail, but I'm going to walk you through, is that you have, first of all, two primary verticals. One vertical is the specialty remodelers, and the other is a full service. Now, specialty are kind of like the Republicans and the Democrats, or the Irish and the Scottish. They're different kind of dialects. They speak, yes, the same language, and yes, they may have the same customer or client, but they have a different product and service. Within the specialty, you have three categories. You have your big three: window, siding, and roofing. Then you have your specialty category that has to do with rooms within the house: kitchens, baths, decks. And then your subspecialty, which is your smaller scale things. Within the full service, You have your small projects, you have your traditional, and then you have larger design build type of companies. Now, the big X's there and the small X's are where you're going to find a lot of those companies that lie. The larger, for example, window siding, roofing, they tend to be fairly big companies, whereas the smaller specialty gutters, glass doors, garage doors, they can oftentimes be smaller companies. Similarly, with a full service, your larger design build type, they require an infrastructure that oftentimes is a little bit better. And then you have on the far right, you have the outliers called the insurance restoration and others. Then on your bottom horizontal, there's a lot of national groups out there, franchises, dealer networks, those kind of things. But I think what this slide really helps you to understand is how those parts and pieces fit together. This next slide is that, construction categories are not created equal. During the recession, the new construction sector dropped off about 75%. Matter of fact, I was just at a talk that Kermit Baker from Harvard and the chief economist for AIA was sharing that, today remodeling represents between 55 and 60% of all the construction activity. However, before the recession, about 70% of it was in fact new construction. Now, design build large scale projects, they dropped off during the recession about 30–40%. Kitchens and baths softened, but smaller scale project and specialty stayed relatively consistent and sustainable. So if you're in a business today and all your eggs, so to speak, are in that big project basket, you may want to look at that portfolio as you think about growth, because we are going to see some softening moving forward. And if we do, and when we do, it's probably going to come in the result of smaller scale projects or projects that are smaller gross sales or ticket sizes, and as a result will have a real impact on your business. Now, going to the whole notion of bigger is better, one of the areas that I do think that helps you to understand kind of what's going on is where the percentage of growth happens in the different sectors. Kitchens and baths are certainly a great place to be. And in the rising kind of economy, especially coming out of the recession in 2009, we saw design build going up. Exterior replacement, though, is the kind of the steady eddy. We haven't necessarily seen the same percentage of growth, but for most of the better and bigger companies, they've seen sustainable growth. Another element is if there's business failures, it oftentimes is in the small businesses. So you can see in this particular slide that those businesses that are tending to be larger, above $1 million, they tend to fail less. So as you think about one reason to grow and have a little bit more sustainability is the likelihood of crashing and burning is also less, as tracked by the Census Bureau. Also, all parts of the country are not equal. I work with a lot of companies all around the country, and I'll tell you right now, some of the Northwest is a little bit softer than some of the Midwest. And certainly the West recovered very quickly, but now it's a little bit tighter and more challenged out there than it is in the Northeast or the Southeast. So as you think about how are you doing, don't just look at the national news. Look at what's happening very, very locally and take a pulse there, because needless to say, if you've got a strong local tailwind, the likelihood of being able to make hay and grow is much, much greater than if you're just looking at national news. So some industry insights. I like to sometimes look at, kind of comparing the past versus today. So if you're looking, for example, right after the recession, 20% growth in individual businesses, I would consider or 5% growth quite respectable. Whereas once we got into 2015, 16, 17, realistically, many companies were growing 20%. Back in 2008, the real focus is just getting the phone to ring again. However, 2017 and beyond was about landing the planes. Matter of fact, I just came from the Extreme Sales Summit, and it's just amazing the level of creative ways that people are selling today versus necessarily just getting leads. 2008, 2012, a lot of businesses were hunkering down and cutting expenses, where in the last 3 or 4 years, it's all been about building the team. Energy and aging in place. That buzzword has been around, since the 80s about, solar and different kind of energy efficiency. But as a business element, I would consider in the past, it was very much of almost a fad. Not that it wasn't really important, but that it wasn't really sustainable. Whereas today, there are a bunch of businesses that are actually grabbing hold of aging in place and energy related issues and really making viable businesses out of them. Right after the recession, one of the key tickets that oftentimes shrunk was that the average price was down. Those companies that, let's say, were doing $75,000 average projects right after the recession, that dropped down to 50. So their lack of growth was a product not of number of clients or number of projects, but it was actually because of the average ticket going down. So since 2016 and 17, we've seen that climb. And one little tip moving forward is do some deep dive analysis in the trailing 12 months of your business. Go back a couple of years and watch that average ticket, because that's usually an indication of something happening in the marketplace that's kind of important to you. The next one is, brand was everything. I think those companies that had strong brand coming out of the recession, I think did well. But now I think there's brand confusion. And that brand confusion is in large part because there's so many products, there's so many services out there. So, your brand is not necessarily has the same value in terms of getting the phone to ring and having equity in the business that it did before, because of the confusion. And honestly, between 2008, and 12, it was just managing kind of through kind of the what was happening. Whereas 2016, 17, it's really more about leading. It's really more about the vision. It's really more about the direction of where you're heading in growth that is successful. Now, I share these things because if you're not either culturally or from a leadership point of view operating on the right side of this equation, then you're probably going to be falling short and maybe slipping a little bit moving forward. So let me talk a little bit about some key business considerations. Like I said, all businesses are not created equal when it comes to the design build versus kitchen and bath versus new construction. But I think as you drill into even design build, full service, especially companies, they're also not created equal. And this group of considerations here shows how your dialects are slightly different. The first is, who's the client? The client demographic is important for you to understand. And I think working with a good digital marketing firm, they're going to actually be able to take you through who is your client, what do they eat for breakfast, how do you cut and slice your client demographic? Because needless to say, as the adage, birds of a feather fly together, and if you don't know who the birds are, it's going to be difficult to know who the other birds are out there that you ought to target. So your client demographic is really important. Certainly specialty versus full service remodeling. More of a practice versus a business. A lot of times that has to do with the scale. Showrooms versus in-home, and I would even go a step further. There are a bunch of companies out there that are seeing a lot of success today with more online sales. In-house crews versus subcontracting. Size and types of remodeling projects. Lead generation methods. Marketing versus word of mouth. Also, who is providing the financing? It's interesting, just coming out of the sales summit, how some of the leading companies are truly embracing and making financing an integral part of their process that not only helps you to generate leads, but also close deals. The sales process, one sit versus multiple sits. Again, I think those out there that are focused on different kind of sales process, there are common denominators that help you be successful, but there are a lot of differences. And then the last one in this that I've certainly discovered in a very heavy way in the last 7 or 8 years is how the owner's motivations are really different from each other. And I want to spend a little time talking about that today, because unless you understand your motivation or your why behind things, the likelihood of you being successful, I think, is going to be much less. So let's just talk about motivations. Now, I thought having been involved in business over 30 years, that what owners and what businesses' motivations are were really very similar. And the reality is that they're really quite different from each other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through 7 motivations. So what I want you to do is I want you to get out just a pad of paper. And as you think about these motivations, I want you to write it down, and I want you to write them all down, and then I want you to come back and put a percentage of your motivation on each one of these criteria. So I'm going to just take a moment and let you grab a pad of paper and a pencil, because this is a really important exercise to know what your motivation or what your business's motivations are. Okay, so I like to kind of think graphically. You can think about this as a big pie chart, or you can think about it as just purely in terms of the percentages of each one of these. So let me just take you through the 7 motivations, and I'm going to do just a little bit of a description that will help you at least understand the language. So the first one is, there are many owners out there, oftentimes smaller scale businesses, that their motivation is they're just happy that they have a job. And what they're happy is they can control that they have a job as opposed to working for someone else. They're not necessarily interested in growth. They're not necessarily interested in the team. They kind of see their business as a paycheck, and that paycheck is coming to them, on a regular basis, and maybe a little bit more, a little bit less, depending on how they do that particular week and month, but they're just happy to have a job. The second motivation I see out there is what I call more the entrepreneurial motivation. Now, in this case, this is a motivator of someone that's very much interested in innovation, interested in creative ideas, opportunities, diversification, just entrepreneurial entrepreneur. Oftentimes, they're chasing all these different shiny objects at the expense, quite frankly, of doing something really, really well. But at the end of the day, that's what motivates you. That's what fuels your passion, is the entrepreneurial spirit. The third one is that the motivation of an owner is an investor. It's all about the return investment. They look at a business, quite frankly, almost like a piece of real estate, and that real estate gives an ROI, a return on investment. They look at even their people in terms of, how much money is each person generating for me, and what the return on investment of having this business is. So more of an investor motivation. Another one that really hit a chord for me as well is the business. And the more you think about the business having a life of its own, it's almost like the business is the patient and you are the doctor watching over that patient, or you're it's the child, so to speak, and you're the parent of that child. It's all about necessarily the growth. It's all about developing a team. It's all about doing the right things out there. The business has a life of its own that's independent from either individual products, clients, or certainly team members. Another motivator is certainly about ego. And, there are many, many remodelers out there that put more value on being on the cover of a magazine than necessarily profitability or necessarily taking care of a team member. Ego is a big, big part of, I think, all of us, but I think some it's much more of a heavier percentage. The sixth is a motivation that I would call more the evangelist, and that is the business has a cause that is greater than either the people or certainly the business itself. It could be relating to the energy or community. It could be related to just doing the right things, certainly in our society, creating kind of joy out there. Whatever that cause is, but it's kind of more of a evangelist mentality or an evangelist motivation. Another very large motivator by a lot of businesses, since a lot are family-owned businesses, is what I call the legacy. That is, what is the future? Now, legacy doesn't always mean immediate family. It means what I created here, what's the future? And as so many of the owners of remodeling business get older and older, this particular issue becomes more important. So if you take these 7 motivations and you've written them down, whether it's a pie chart or whether it's just a list, write down the percentage of each one of these that represents who you are. Now, As you think about this, what you want to do then is share it with your key team members and have them kind of look at these motivations and put the right blend in. Because if you want to be successful, one of the things and make the right decisions and grow in the right way, one of the things that I know for sure is you've got to know your why. You've got to know what motivates you and why are you doing what you're doing. And if you have that clarity in your why, you have that clarity in your motivations, then the likelihood that you're going to make the right growth decisions moving forward is much greater. So looking at this whole subject of growth for a minute here, and that is, how do we define growth? You know, again, I think for many, if I ask audiences that I'm speaking to, how do you define growth? Or do you think defining growth is something that there's common denominators? I think most people would say, yes, of course, there are common denominators. And then I go around the room and I ask people how they define growth, and oftentimes it's very different from each other. So I'm going to take you through not how you should define growth, but just examples of how what I see different remodeling businesses define growth. The first is they look at the simple, they look at the top line growth, top line sales. This year I did 2 million, next year I did 2.5 or want to do 2.5. The previous year I did 1.5. They do it based on top line growth. Nothing wrong with it. It's a good measuring stick. Doesn't mean you've made any money, but it's certainly a way to measure growth. The second, which is not very common in the remodeling industry, but it is very, very common in other industries, especially in distribution and manufacturing, is what your market share is. And it's not very common in the remodeling industry, in large part because you have such a small market share. You know, when I studied this with some companies years ago, there wasn't any company, very large companies I was working with in the remodeling space, that had any more than 1% of the home improvement spend. So when you have that small of a spend, then gaining market share, quite frankly, is not that relevant. The second is growing your portfolio. It might be that you're very singularly focused and you can define growth by having some diversity. I oftentimes will ask companies that have multiple products or services, you know, what percentage are bathrooms, kitchens, windows? What percentage of them design build versus specialty, handyman versus insurance restoration? But when you understand that percentage, that might be the way you want to grow, because oftentimes by diversifying in lower risk type products and services, it really will help you. Another way to define growth is the team itself. Now, one of the issues, if you want to take your business to the next level, you've got to start to be thinking about how your team is evolving and growing. One common denominator that I share with leaders, that I get into this with companies and certainly take an inventory, is what I call the leadership gap. It's the gap between the owner and the other key team members. And when that gap becomes too great, it's almost like a string on a balloon that you can't continue to float higher because it's pulling you back. So you've got to look at the team in terms of their growth. Certainly profitability is a very common denominator, and that can be looked at in terms of total dollars, or it could be a percentage of dollars. Both are important metrics. The client experience, today more than ever, you've got many different ways to judge the growth in terms of the client and the client experience, whether it's the numbers of the client base itself. In many businesses, by growing that, you're creating, I think, more sustainability and ongoing lifetime revenue. But it also could be in terms of your promoter scores. It could be in terms of your client ratings. It could be in terms of your Google reviews that you try to focus on growth and improvement. Another way that I think more mature, well-heeled businesses, they're looking for more sustainability, more predictability. If you really kind of think about that, is the one thing that pulls businesses down is when you're not predicting correctly. You predict something and you fall short, or reversely, you are too conservative with your predictions and you exceed it and you kind of wish, in fact, you would have invested and predicted a little bit more. Strategic alliances is another way to think about growth as well. And I think that, as a business gets, especially when they get above 7 or 8 million, that's when you need to kick these in place and realize, you can't be kind of an island by yourself. And these alliances, whether they're service providers, manufacturers, distributors, they become important to you as well. So let's just talk a little bit about the right pace of growth. I think that oftentimes there's some misconceptions here. And one of the key misconceptions is the higher level of growth, really the better. So I didn't actually create a slide specifically on all the different levels, but in kind of the go-go times, those percentages are going to be higher because it's going to be a heavy tailwind that'll push you forward. But in what I would call today's times, which is more normalized times, write down these percentages that I'm giving you. 0 to 5% growth, quite frankly, you're actually falling short. It's kind of like if you're getting 1% on your money, if inflation is higher than that, you're going backward. I think that's true with growth of a business. 0 to 5% growth is actually slipping backward. Your team's not excited. You're not working. You're not pushing hard enough. 5 to 10% growth, I think for businesses today is okay, but it's extremely safe. And I think what I would be concerned with, quite frankly, is not that that's a good profitable level of growth, but are you challenging and are you keeping your top key members kind of excited about you in the business? 10 to 20% growth is where I see the sweet spot in normalized times. Now, you don't have to take this literally, but when you see 10 to 20% growth, that's where you can not only have the team inspired, you can see the right level of profitability, you can gain market share, you can certainly see a lot of things that are very effective on the client sides and take your business to the next level. Where I think you get started challenge is above 20%. 20 to 30% growth can happen, but you have to be a superb leader and a great business to be in there and be profitable and healthy. And when you get above 30% growth, believe it or not, more businesses fail and more businesses actually go backward and lose money when they get to that level of growth. So I share this because what you have to do is you've got to look at the rate of growth. And I encourage you, go back the last 5 years. The last 5 years have been in kind of growth times, and look at it year over year at what that percentage of growth is, and look at it as it compares to what this is, to what I just shared with you. And if you don't remember this, certainly ask for the recording of this webinar and then go back to look at that rate of growth as it relates to your business. So one of the common questions I get is, why do businesses fail? And what I've found as I've drilled down on this subject, there really are 3 reasons that I think I see businesses fail. The first is that they're not in focus. Focus in business today is very, very important. The speed of the way things are happening, you've got to be laser focused. And if you're not laser focused on the product, the service, the processes, the systems, the team, then you might fail. The second is you have a kind of a commitment failure. You got excited, your partner, your spouse got excited about going to the business, whatever many years ago it was, whether it's 20 years or 10 years, and now all of a sudden your commitment to this may be because you're older, or maybe because of your partner's commitment is waned. If you're not committed to this, it's going to be hard to be successful. And the last is capital. Now, I'm a big believer that capital is both time and money. You have to have the right amount of money to be investing into the business. And if you're stripping the business from the capital and not having enough to invest in and making your decisions based on how much money's in your checking account and not necessarily into the right thing for the business, you might end up failing. So look at this little 3 things as a little checklist. Grade yourself on focus, commitment, and capital. Ask some of your key team member, where do they fall into these 3? And I think if you do that, you're going to be more successful. So let's just drill a little bit more deeply and talk about how things have changed in business today. In the past, you had in the go-go times of 2003 to 2004, clients would say, let's just do it. Why? Because their homes were appreciating at a very high rate, where today they're much more in a discuss it mode. You have to have processes and systems that are a little bit more patient with consumers and that discuss it mode, not just flipping the switch and doing it. In the past, they were willing to take a lot more risk, where I think today they want more balanced risk or reducing risk. You know, in the past, clients would find you. Now you have to go out and you have to be a hunter, not a farmer. You've got to be able to find your clients. And again, you need to have a nice balance of traditional advertising with your digital marketing efforts. But most importantly, you've got to have a dashboard or certainly a way to track those leads very carefully and how you're doing it. High touch marketing, all those personal referrals, high tech marketing today. And you need a balance of those two if you're going to be successful. In the past, you could just follow the fantasy. Now your job is to be the voice of reason for the client, to actually control their fantasy if you want to see projects get done. In the past, you could focus on the what, the project itself, the price of the project. Today, you need to focus on the client experience as just as much as the project itself. So again, as I said earlier, if you're not operating on the right side of this equation, you're probably going to slip back a bit. Okay, moving on. So the consumer environment, if you want to grow a business, you got to understand some of the key metrics. What are those stars and planets out there? What are those key indicators that you've got to keep an eye on? And I've put together a few. These are what we use at Harvard in terms of helping at least to create the key indicators for the LIRA, the leading indicator of remodeling activity. One is home appreciation. Homeowners like it when their house goes up in value and they get nervous when it goes down in value. So again, you've got to watch whether that's going up or down. Interest rates. Interest rates are a little bit of a double-edged sword in that if interest rates are especially low, right, like they are right now, it actually helps the client who wants to move, but it also helps the client, I think, who wants to renovate as well. Unemployment. That's important. It's mainly to have the confidence that they're going to have a job in the future more than whether they have a job. New housing, it's an important indicator of what's going on out there. And right now, the demand for housing is much greater, and therefore, the interest in staying in an existing home is certainly greater. The stock market. Well, you may not be anxious to invest a lot into the stock market today. That is a key indicator in terms of how things are going. And usually when the stock market is doing well, and since the recession, it's gone up over 400%. So I would call that doing well. Usually the wealth, I think, can be transferred, but also I think that creates the confidence. And that's really the key word. The biggest driver, I think, for the home improvement kind of industry is consumer confidence. When consumer confidence is good, people want to invest in their greatest asset, their home. So I would say if you look at all these boxes here, for the most part, they're thumbs up. So it really is a good time to invest in growth rather than just hunker down. So what I want to do next is I want to spend a little time talking about kind of what I'm calling the road to 10 million. Now, needless to say, it's just as much of a clever kind of wordsmith on the road to something as it is anything else. But the best way I can do to talk about this is kind of to highlight this is almost like a series of steps or passages or going to different altitudes, so to speak. And I'm going to start by just taking a few minutes on each one of these steps, starting with $1 million business, $3 million business, $5 million business, and then all the way up to 10 million and then beyond. I think if you can start to see and experience the difference between these, it's not just about the numbers. It's not just about the money. It's also about the differences in the business culture. It's the difference in where your focus needs to be and how your levels of risk will change at different business sizes. So let's just start with a $1 million business. Number one, $1 million business is what I would call more of a practice. It's very much dependent on the owner. Many people, $1 million business is certainly not even saleable because once you take the owner out of the formula, you really don't have anything. The owner oftentimes is forced, based on this scale, to wear multiple hats. Multiple hats being obviously a marketer, sales, production. You might have a few crew members, but at the end of the day, you're probably not necessarily an expert. You're more of wearing these multiple hats and juggling all these balls is what the role is. And at the end of the day, I think what I recommend for businesses like this, you want to have 101 business kind of acumen or IQ. You got to have your basics down. You got to know that you need to have the phone ringing, so it's leads. You need to know you need a certain amount of sales. You need to know that you need to generate a certain amount of gross profit, and then you need to know that you have an overhead. And at the end of the day, net profit, or the extra money that you make in a $1 million business, is just math. It's not about the profit. What it is about A plus B plus C equals the profitability at the end of the day. The next level is a $3 million business. Now, needless to say, there's a big jump between 1 and 3, and I'm not suggesting it's literally a light switch you flip, but some of the differences are, once you move from a 1 million to a 3 million, team development needs to start to be a priority. It starts to become more of a team sport. You're spending, I think, as an owner, more of your time on team development, team recruiting, making sure that the team is happy. You also need to start to decouple sales from production, from marketing, when you get up to that size. You need to have specialists within each one. And then lastly, you need to not just have a basic business IQ, but you need to start to have business systems and processes in place, some light levels of technology. Otherwise, the business will be out of control. Once you move to the next level, $5 million business, I think now you need to know your numbers. It needs to be more data driven. You need to be more targeted and know the why and who is contacting you, where you're making your money, where you're not making your money. Much, much more of the beginning development of a leadership team, not just you and the rest of the pack. And in this leadership team, as you almost look at it as like a dining table, you might start to think about, I need to have someone in that around that dining table that's going to be focused on marketing, someone's focused on sales, someone focused on production, and certainly admin and maybe financial. Now, you might wear a couple of those hats, but you need to start developing a leadership team if you're going to be successful. Next level is you need to be spending a lot more time and energy truly understanding financial aspects of the business, the difference between the smart, healthy businesses, oftentimes between a $5 million business that is just out there selling and out there producing projects, is in fact their ability to get their gross margins up, to really have their financial acumen and their profitability in check so they can invest properly back in the business. The next level that we're talking about here is a $7 million business. Now, again, these are not necessarily black and white steps, but certainly 7 is more than 3 and 5 is more than 1. But in that $7 million business, I think now you're looking at efficiencies. You're looking at effectiveness, mastery of time, not only time for you, but mastering for the team member and looking for more efficient ways of doing things. At a $7 million, you need to get out of the Stone Age, and technology has got to be a top priority. Technology in terms of certainly your marketing efforts, but also in your systems and your processes and how you communicate internally and externally. Whether you go paperless or whether you don't, but technology needs to be a real priority. And certainly at that point, you're beyond kind of the personal referral level and doing kind of the basics. Digital marketing needs to be an integral part of your thinking. So moving on to the next level, and before I get to that, I want to just touch on, you've got to focus on you and your leadership. But let's just talk about you for a minute, and then we'll wrap up talking about a 10 million. If you want to continue to grow and you want to move your business to the future in terms of your leadership, it all starts with your having the right mindset. And right mindset is you have to be the voice of reason. As Henry Ford said, if you think you can or can't, you're right. Your team is now depending on you being that cheerleader within the business and motivating and inspiring, not just having kind of the sticks and bricks knowledge. You have to start to invest in yourself and in terms of your acumen. You have to have kind of MBA, so to speak, in the remodeling business. And you can get that in a lot of different ways, but you have to be a student of success. And you've got to be spending the right amount of time on both the short and the long term. I encourage that right kind of blend that I'll talk about in a minute. So now let's move to the next level of a $10 million business and beyond. And I know for many of you, you probably can't even dream about that. But I work with a bunch of companies that are 10, some are 20s, some are even over $100 million in business. And while I think they're all different from each other, it's more about the altitudes. It's more about, I think, understanding these steps and focusing on the right steps as you're moving forward. So at a $10 million business, what you have to realize first and foremost is it's not about you. The business is going to have a life of its own. You got to put your ego aside. And I think if you really want to have a bigger business, it's not necessarily about you. You've got to listen to those dissonant voices. You got to listen to what the client is saying and let the business, I think, evolve to what that is. Second is, you heard me say this little notion before. The business is the patient. And the patient in this case is what you need to focus on and help it be healthy. Your time. I like this blend, 10% long-term, 20% medium-term, and 70% short-term. What I find with a lot of owners, especially at this size, they're still spending 90% of their time on the short-term and not enough on the long and medium-term. But there's not a choice at this scale. You got to be focused on leadership, not just managing or management. You've also got to be focused on growing your champions, growing your top guns, because it's those champions within your business that are going to help take you to the next level. You also need to keep in balance the risk levels of the business. I think going back to my earlier comment about chasing the shiny objects, oftentimes you can do that, but they have to be put in incubators and experiments, not necessarily a new direction. You've got to focus on managing the level of risk if you're that high, because now you're at an altitude. If you fall or stumble, you're going to come crashing down. And a lot of these businesses go out of business in large part because they took too much risk. And then the last element is that while it's nice to have relationships when you're smaller, you need to depend on relationships when you get to a 10 million and beyond. These are with manufacturers. These are with marketing providers. These are with different kind of relationships that you have, and you need to think of them as alliances and partners, not just vendors in business. So I want to summarize here with what I think are some keys to success. And I think if you just kind of simplify this and you take it to the next level based on these keys to success, the likelihood that you're going to be there is much greater. Many of these things I've talked about today, but I think you can kind of summarize it with some of these highlights. One is know your why. If you don't know your why, don't expect your team members or your client to know your why. Spend some time really not only thinking about it, talking to your family about it, but also talking to your key team members. The second is this is a business, not a product. The more that you can understand the difference between a business or an experience and not a project or a product, the better you're going to be. Master time. Time becomes really critical. As I said, we're all dealt with the same amount of time in a day and a week. However, some know how to master it, and those are the most successful business owners out there. The fourth element is really know the right clients, the right marketing, and the right people. There's a lot of ways to get to this, but oftentimes if you have challenges in business, it's usually because of allowing a shark client to swim into the net, or you're getting overly glossy-eyed over potentially a big project or a whale that's going to eat you up. Also, doing the right marketing for you and having the right team members in place. Another, I think, realization that's important to have is 80% of your success is a science, not an art. And the more that you can focus on the processes, the systems, the formulas, the learnings, the more successful you're going to be. You're not born to have a great business. It's very much a science and formula that can be developed. And then you can sprinkle in the art to add your personality and add that magic. It's a movie, not a snapshot. You know, I heard this many, many years ago from my former partner that I really, really think is critical. And that is, you've got to think about it like a movie, which is a series of snapshots. It's not one thing, it's a long-term kind of plan. And you keep the destination and keep the horizon in mind. And I think you're going to be more successful. And then lastly, and I've said this over and over again, is think synergistically. And those have heard the formula synergistic. It's 1 + 1 = 3. Is the sum of the parts are greater than those individual parts. And I think the more that you think synergistically in business, the healthier you're going to be. So I want to thank everybody for certainly joining me for this portion of our webinar today. As Amanda said earlier, you know, you can have a copy of my book. It's a gift. I have 3 different books that you can pick from: How Fit Is Your Business, Fit to Grow, or The Art of Time Mastery. They'll send you a copy of that simply by having a brief conversation with one of their team. But regardless, I think I would encourage you to do that, because that's going to help you, I think, really understand the possibilities when it comes to some of the technologies that are out there today. So again, thank you for joining me today, and I'm going to turn it back over to Amanda.
Awesome, thank you, Mark. So before we head into the winner of the Google Home Hub, I want to ask if you would like a free copy of one of Mark's books. As he just mentioned, all we ask for in return is a brief conversation to answer your questions on digital marketing. This is a great opportunity for you to see how partnering with a digital marketing company can make a huge improvement in your marketing efforts. So now we will head into our winner, and today's lucky recipient of a Google Home Hub is Megan Montgomery. Congratulations, Megan. Please email marketing@surefirelocal.com with your full mailing address, and I'll ship that right out to you. Huge thank you to Mark and to all of you for taking the time out of your day to join us. We hope you learned something new, and we look forward to seeing you online on our future webinars. Please take a minute to fill out the survey at the end and let us know how we did today and what topics you would like to hear about in the future. We love checking out the topics you suggest when we plan our webinar schedule. Thanks, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.